Welcome to this rapid revision video looking at Paper 3, Question 2, the Explain question worth 12 marks in the Pearson Edexcel History paper. I'll be focusing on the modern depth study, USA 1954 to 1975 conflict at home and abroad, but you might well find this video useful for exam skills in any of the other topics covered too. Firstly, an introduction to the Pearson Edexcel Paper 3. These skills might be useful for other exam boards as well, but I'd recommend that you use something specific to your exam board rather than this guide if you really want specific advice on answering questions. The Pearson Edexcel Paper 3 generally covers a modern depth study. An example of such a study, which I teach, is the USA, Conflict at Home and Abroad, 1954 to 1975. This particular topic comprises the civil rights, which is the component known as conflict at home, and the Vietnam War, which means conflict abroad. Other topics are similarly organised, e.g. Germany 1918 to 1939 constitutes both Weimar Germany and Nazi Germany. You'll answer questions on sources, your knowledge and interpretations in this paper. Therefore, there is a separate sources and interpretations sheet and booklet included as part of the exam. You can see that in the instructions on the front page. The total time for this exam is 1 hour or sometimes 1 hour and 25 minutes. You'll find the timings put on the front of the exam paper. That's the time for both sections. It's worth bearing in mind that if you were, for example, doing conflict at home and abroad, it's not necessarily to say that the first section will be on civil rights and the second section will be on the Vietnam War. Actually, it could be the other way round too. Let's have a look at the example question that I'm going to do today, remembering that many of the principles I'll be discussing are applicable to any question and any topic. Explain why the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded in achieving its aims. This is a 12-mark answer. That gives you a bit of an indication as to how long you should spend on this answer and how much you should write. But the exam board doesn't just leave you guessing, it gives you a little bit of help too. You may use the following in your answer: the Montgomery Improvement Association and the Supreme Court. You may use those examples, but you don't have to. However, it's often a good idea to include those because the examiner will be on the lookout for those in particular, and you know them to be accurate and relevant to the question. That's why they've been included. However, you must also use information of your own. That means that if you just stick to those two stimulus points, you cannot get full marks, as we'll see when we have a look at the exam board's own marking criteria in a moment. The crucial thing here is that you are explaining why the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded in achieving its aims. The question is assuming that you know what its aims were. If you're not sure, I'll remind you that the main aim was desegregating buses in Montgomery, but also addressing other forms of discrimination on public transport. So what do you do for this question? For this question, you'll need to explain how examples you know led to the success of the Montgomery bus boycott. Within this, it is implicit that you know what those aims were as well. In the exam board's booklet or mark scheme, it says that the target for this question is the analysis of second order concepts, in this case causation, why things happen. That's counted as assessment objective 2. Also, the knowledge and understanding of key features and characteristics of the particular topic, so how much you know. That's known as assessment objective 1. So AO2 gets 6 marks, AO1 gets 6 marks as well, equal weighting for both, 12 marks total. Simple enough. You should include enough examples, 3 is probably sufficient, including one of your own, and include a brief conclusion explaining the most important reason or overall theme as to how the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded. You should aim to spend about 18 minutes on this question, though again you might find yourself doing this a little bit more quickly. Let's have a look at what the mark scheme says for this. I'm only going to show level 3 and 4 on the mark scheme rather than level 0, which is basically not writing anything, and levels 1 and 2, which we don't really want to be aiming for. We want to be aiming higher than that. There are key differences between these different levels, which are outlined in the mark scheme. Yes, these are written in the jargon of the examiner, but I'm going to highlight a couple of them now. For level 3, it says that an explanation is given showing some analysis, which is mainly directed at the conceptual focus of the question. In this case, why the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded in achieving its aims. Compare that though to level 4, which says an analytical explanation is given, which is directed consistently at the conceptual focus of the question. It means that you don't wander away from the point at all and you keep everything laser sighted on that issue of why the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded. It shows a line of reasoning that is generally sustained, although some passages may lack coherence and organisation. It means that you might get a few things in the wrong order, or it might not necessarily follow that you've got a consistent argument, but all the right pieces are in there in some way. However, on the other side, for level 4, you need to show a line of reasoning that is coherent and consistent, and you don't wander from the point. It's sustained and it's logically structured. Then have a look at the knowledge section. Accurate and relevant information is included, showing good knowledge as opposed to accurate and relevant information is precisely selected. In other words, you're choosing the very best examples to support your opinion to address the question directly, showing a wide-ranging knowledge and understanding of the period. And that's a wide-ranging knowledge rather than just a good knowledge. Note though that that's not all. You can only get a maximum of 8 marks for this answer if you don't include some of your own examples and you just stick to the stimulus points, and you cannot in fact access level 4 at all unless you include some of your own knowledge. That's easy enough to do, but it is worth bearing in mind. You might write the otherwise perfect answer, but if you only include the Montgomery Improvement Association and the Supreme Court, you're not going to get level 4. Let's have a look at an example of how you might answer this. If you prefer, you can pause the video here and have a go before you look at my example. With my students, I use a formula of point, example, explain and link to help them structure their paragraphs. This isn't essential, but it helps show the process with which this is being written. Part of the challenge for me, as being a historian with a degree level education, is that I'm tempted to write in a more complex way, but I've tried to do these questions not perfectly, but in the style that a 16-year-old taking their GCSE exams might be able to do for themselves. One reason that the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded was that the Montgomery Improvement Association was well organised. That's my point. The boycotters needed to be committed to the cause and find ways around the inconvenience of it, so the MIA organised carpools to provide transport. They were also able to successfully publicise the boycott and demand an end to segregation on buses. This meant that people could get to work and travel despite the need to avoid using the buses, which would maximise the pressure on the city authorities. This helped the boycott to succeed in ending segregation, as it meant that the boycott could continue sufficiently long to ensure that the city authorities ended segregation on the buses. I'm going to draw your attention in particular to the last paragraph in a moment, or the last sentence I should say, but first let's see where the marks are coming from. The first one, the point, is mostly AO2 because I'm actually giving a reason why it succeeded. That's related to my explanation of why the bus boycott succeeded in achieving its aims. My next part is supporting detail, AO1, which is knowledge. The next is a little bit of both. It provides some extra detail, but it also explains how that ended up putting pressure on the city and helps explain the causation of why the bus boycott succeeded. And the last part is arguably the most important. This is where I really nail down and make it absolutely abundantly clear to the examiner that I am explaining in relation to what's being raised in the question. This helped the boycott to succeed, and then I give the aim in ending segregation. That's what we call the link sentence, and you're linking it back to the question. Let's have a look at another way of putting this. Rosa Parks was important as she began the boycott by refusing to move from her seat. Let's hold on a moment. Is Rosa Parks one of our stimulus points? No, it isn't, because that is a part of my own knowledge, and an examiner would pick up upon that and you'd be getting AO1 marks for this. Something to bear in mind is that you do not lose marks for giving incorrect information, you just don't gain any more. So if you're really unsure, you're better off putting it down, and maybe you'll be right, rather than putting nothing down and guaranteeing that you don't get anything. Now my example. In December in 1955, she was arrested after she refused to move when told to. Montgomery buses were segregated at this time, so the MIA planned a boycott to stop this. Rosa Parks was useful in the MIA because as a respectable married woman, she was a figurehead that opponents of the boycott would find difficult to discredit. After about a year, the buses were integrated, showing that the boycott succeeded in the end. So I get some AO1 and AO2 marks for that green section there, where I'm explaining how Rosa Parks helped the bus boycott succeed. But wait, it's not all good here. Unfortunately, that point is not directly related to the focus of the question. It's just a fact about it. And it's a really important thing to do here to make sure that all of your points and all of your explanations are focused on the question. Here, that question is how the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded in its aims. I do bring it round a little bit later on, but I'm afraid my supporting detail here is also not really focused on how it achieved its aims. It's just facts about it. And what about my link sentence? After about a year, the buses were integrated, showing that the boycott succeeded in the end, is true, but is it an explanation as to how the boycott succeeded? Not really. It's just stating what the outcome was. So do be careful with this. An otherwise good-looking paragraph, if not correctly focused on the issue, won't get you as many marks as one that is properly structured and focused on the question. So let's have a look at what I should have done. Overall, the most important reason the Montgomery bus boycott succeeded was that the direct action protest was backed by an effort to get the Supreme Court to back the cause of desegregation. The commitment of the boycotters, supported by the MIA, raised publicity and gave time for the NAACP to be successful in the case Browder versus Gale in 1956. This meant that not only had the boycott put pressure on the city authorities to end their segregation on the buses, the Supreme Court ruled in their favour, based on the earlier Brown versus Board of Education case. This achieved the main aim of the boycott, which was to integrate Montgomery's buses. This was achieved by December 1956. So I get good AO2 marks there for actually analysing the relative importance of different parts of this particular answer. So I've actually identified that, in my view, the most important reason why the bus boycott succeeded was the direct action protest, the boycott itself. This is also relevant supporting detail. And we've also got both relevant supporting detail and an explanation of the role of the Supreme Court here too. Notice that actually I've included some of my own knowledge here, like Browder versus Gale in 1956, which goes well beyond the stimulus points, as well as referring to the stimulus points by referring to the Supreme Court in that green section. And lastly, I do link it back directly to the question. This achieved the main aim of the boycott is another way of phrasing how the boycott succeeded, and so that would be focused on the question for AO2 marks. Now, you might want to write a little bit more than I've done here, but that gives you the main nuts and bolts of how you should approach a question like this. If you want to do a bit more exam practice, here are some example questions for the civil rights topic. Explain why there was rioting in black communities 1965 to 1968. Your stimulus points would be What's LA 1965 and the Kerner Report 1968. It's important with these questions to have a look at the date range and make sure that your examples are drawn from within that date range. Explain how education was integrated between 1954 and 1962. Again, be careful with the date range. Your stimulus points are Little Rock in 1957 and James Meredith in 1962. Explain how civil rights protests changed between 1960 and 1965. Stimulus points being Birmingham 1963 and SNCC. But what about the other side to it? Remember, these 12-mark explain answers could be on the other side of your course. With the one that I teach, that would be the Vietnam War. All of these might be likely to turn up, or the style of questions. Explain why the Viet Minh were successful in defeating the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Your stimulus points being support from China and American support for the French. And explain why US and ARVN tactics were ineffective in defeating the Viet Cong. Stimulus points being troop morale and Operation Cedar Falls in 1967. You could pause the video here and have a go at some of those answers and compare them to the mark scheme that we included earlier. You could even have a go at marking them yourself. But what if you're not doing the course that I teach, USA Conflict at Home and Abroad 1954 to 1975? Well, here are some others taken from past papers. Firstly, China. Explain why the Great Leap Forward failed to achieve its aims. You may use the following in your answer: backyard furnaces, Mao's leadership, but you must also use information of your own. It's the same format as what I've covered before, and you could use very similar techniques like point, example, explain and link to answer that. But don't ask me for the specific knowledge here, it's not something that I teach myself, so good luck. What about Russia? Explain why the Bolsheviks were able to seize power in Russia in October 1917. Okay, I do know a few things about this one, but again, I'm not going to have time to go through it in great detail. Your stimulus points here would be food shortages and the leadership of Trotsky. And the Germany topic, which is a very popular one. Explain why there was opposition in Germany to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. You could refer to the military terms, or you could refer to the territorial terms. But remember to include some of your own examples too. Territorial meaning land, remember, and military anything to do with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, etc. With that one there, I would suggest that some good own knowledge might be about Article 231, the so-called War Guilt Clause. What about our final points? 12-mark explain questions require detailed knowledge and precise explanation. There's 6 marks for your knowledge, 6 marks for your analysis. You'll be provided with 2 stimulus points which you may use, but you will need to include examples from your own knowledge too to get the top marks. You will need to explain your answer in relation to the issue raised in the question, so keep this in mind. Sometimes you might find it helpful to circle this on your paper or even just do a quick plan of the examples you intend to include. And remember, if it's helpful for you, make your point, give a supporting example, explain its importance or its effects, and then link it back to the question, just as we showed earlier. That's the end of this look at this particular question within paper 3 for the Edexcel paper. I hope it's been useful to you, and if it has, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. If you need further advice, perhaps pop something in the comments below and I'll try and give it to you. All the best, and I'll see you another time. Goodbye.